Then there's some other biographies that weren't on the previous list. Albert Beveridge, highly regarded. LaWanda Cox, Lincoln and Black Freedom. David Donald's biography of Lincoln's Herndon is highly regarded. Benjamin Quarles, Lincoln and the Negro. That's also a document that, if you want to pursue it further, I think it offers some good help. Okay. Another way that I make a judgment as to whether or not the material is good, I read book reviews. And it depends on who's doing the reviewing. If I've never heard of the reviewer, then I have a question mark, and I ask a question, and I hope it doesn't mean that I'm an intellectual snob or something, but if you don't have any credential, it's tough to read or review something that somebody that's a scholar. I've done some reviewing of books, and I really did, in some cases, really had to do some homework before I was ready to say what I thought of the book. And there is a tendency outside of the scholastic world, I think, to sugarcoat reviews. And people write reviews and all they do is talk about the content. They don't make any judgment about the research, its presentation, the quality, and so forth. So I think book reviews, and depending on who's doing the reviewing. On the back of books, it's very common now, as you know, to have blurbs on the back of the book. And I read those also. Who is endorsing the book? When James McPherson puts his name on the dust jacket, he would never do that if he thought it was a lousy book. He just would not do that. As small as I am in that continuum as a scholar, I'm not putting my name on it either. And quite often, presses send me manuscripts and want me to read them and evaluate them, and I get paid for doing that. But I'm not going to recommend somebody's manuscript that I think is poorly done, because I don't want my name saying Anderson recommended it. Well, now you get up to this level, which is just short of bumping your head on heaven. So he writes a book, and who are the people that are endorsing it? David McCullough wrote Adams, okay? Wrote the greatest biography of Truman. Wrote 1776, a wonderful book. Well, he puts his name on it? He's not going to do that. He absolutely will not endorse the book. The next one, David Herbert Donald. He puts his name on this book. It's got to say something. The next one, Doug Wilson, that I just mentioned. Next one, Ron White. Next one, Louis Lehrman. Okay? And they all are trumpeting this small book about Lincoln. And, you know, it's not very much money. Pick it up. And $12.95. It's a great short read. And I know how busy all of you are as teachers. Well, with what I'm saying, reviews, blurbs, look at who's writing the foreword. I've now gotten to write some forewords. Well, I'm not going to write a foreword for a book that I don't think is good, because my name is going on it, and I hope that my word has some credibility, or else somebody, well, Anderson is so anxious to get his name in print, he'll write a foreword for anybody's book. He'll write a blurb for anybody's book. And it looks to me like this ought to go in the trash or shouldn't go in any public school library. So my point is, is this just an old boys club? Just a bunch of guys, you scratch my back? I don't think so. I think those writers about Lincoln who have really established a reputation and have stood the criticism and the test of time represent the deans of the literature. And I urge you to think about that and pay attention to what they say. And you'll find that many of them were educated by other great scholars. David Donald, where did he go? University of Illinois, studied under James Garfield Randall. Richard Current, big name in history. Where did he go to school? University of Illinois. Not just the University of Illinois, but who did he study with? Who influenced him? And all of you as teachers, you know how much influence you have. People ask me, why do I love history? Where was my inspiration? From my teachers. And I can name them. And I talk about them. And students are doing the same thing about you. And so many of these great scholars studied and did research and were and were mentored by a great Lincoln scholar. And it's just not snobbery. It's not just, where did you get your degree from? We're not talking about where you got your degree from. It's who you had an opportunity to study with. When I thought that I was going to be a PhD in history and teach at the university, I wanted to go to LSU because T. Harry Williams was a professor there, and my interest is the Civil War. And like many of you, along came a little person in my family, and I said, I got to go to work. I can't go to graduate school. Well, it may be interesting to you to think about who were the first people to write biographies of Abraham Lincoln. And the book that I had a moment ago, right here, all in here by Paul Engel, and let me just read them quickly, and it'll be interesting, I think. Joshua Holland wrote a book called The Life of Abraham Lincoln. Who was he? He was the co-editor of a newspaper in Springfield, Massachusetts, and then became an editor of Scribner's, a very famous periodical. The next, and that was 1866, 1 year after Lincoln died. The next one came out in 1872. That was written by Ward Hill Layman. And he was an Illinois lawyer, a friend of Lincoln, and he was the marshal, in other words, the chief of police of Washington, D.C. The next one was Isaac N. Arnold, The Life of Abraham Lincoln, 1885. He was a lawyer, an Illinois congressman, and a close friend and supporter of Lincoln. The next was William H. Herndon, who was, of course, Lincoln's last law partner, and he wrote his book in 1889. Herndon's Lincoln, The True Story of a Great Life. Nicolay and Hay, John Nicolay and John Hay, both secretaries to Lincoln, wrote a 10-volume biography of Abraham Lincoln, pretty highly regarded. And then, but the point that I wanted to make, of all of those early biographies, what's the commonality? They all knew Lincoln. They were all supporters of Lincoln. And that doesn't mean that there aren't any good, but as you and I, as readers and students, know that they probably had a hard time being totally objective. Can you imagine if anybody in this room said, oh yeah, I've lived longer than Methuselah and I went to school with Lincoln. And it'd be hard to say, well, I'm really objective. All right. I've already mentioned the collective works of Lincoln, the 8 volumes. If you're really a serious student, and I know how busy you are as public school teachers, but to have a little bit of an opportunity to taste some of Lincoln by actually reading what he wrote is quite a joy. Have we exhausted the subject of Lincoln? Well, believe it or not, through the years we continue to discover new material. I mentioned the Robert Todd Lincoln collection. Just imagine, his oldest son grabs up everything from Lincoln's office, and it's stored in Bloomington, Illinois. It's embargoed. And the scholars are, you know, when James Garfield Randall did the first volume, he had no access to it. And he knows that there may well be some terrific material that's going to change our interpretation. So in 1947, everybody, Carl Sandburg, when he did Lincoln the Warriors, which came out in 1939, he knew what was there, but he couldn't get his hands on it. And in his letters, he said, oh, would I ever, you know, I don't know. I've written now 6 volumes on Lincoln. Did I get it right? But there's a whole body of information that I didn't get to look at. Well, that's not all. In 1990, scholars in Illinois said, you know, we don't know enough about Lincoln's great law career, legal career. And they put together a great big team, and they went to every courthouse that Lincoln practiced law in. And man, did they find a treasure trove. They found 100,000 documents. And I'm sure there were some that lost, because many courthouses do a lousy job of preserving and being preservationists of records. But they got over 100,000 documents that documented 5,000 civil and criminal cases that Lincoln was involved in his 25-year law career. That's all now on CD-ROM that we can access. Again, the great historian biographer David Donald wrote, if you want to get into the question of how Abraham Lincoln was prepared for greatness, you have to look at his legal career.